You are staring at an evil man. This is a man who was caught on camera leading a little girl out from a pachinko parlor, and she was never seen ever again. Shockingly, this incident was just the latest in a long string of attacks on children stretching back to the 1970s in that part of Japan. And the most shocking part, even if Japan found him tomorrow, they couldn't arrest him.
Charlie Dogwood.
This is probably one of the most controversial ones that I'm ever going to do on the channel just because of the content. This is the story of how a lone man stalked the Japanese countryside and did what he wanted with children. Children in Japan are often given more leeway and more freedom than in the West, and even back in the 1970s and 80s, this was even more so the case. Unfortunately, this one lone man decided to take advantage of this. Over the course of around 11 years, this man took the lives of 3 children in one town, each disappearing mere miles away from each other. In fact, over the course of a little under 20 years, this lone figure can be tied to the disappearance of as many as 11 children, boys and girls, around the Gunma, Ibaraki, and Tochigi prefectures on the northern outskirts of the Tokyo metropolis. His crimes robbed children of life and families of their loved ones, and even resulted in a man spending years behind bars for a crime that he didn't commit. In fact, his crime spree was so prolific that Michael Jackson somehow got involved. Today, we're going to discuss how this injustice occurred and a little bit about why this individual cannot be charged under Japanese law despite his horrible crimes, and how there were others who also had similar luck in evading the long arm of the law. It's August of 1979. In Japan, that means heat, humidity, and a lot of rain. It was a Friday. In Tochigi's Ashikaga City, about an hour and a half away from Tokyo by car, a 5-year-old girl played alone at a shrine near her home. She disappeared. No one was quite sure where she had went. Soon the police began to search, and as time wore on, a simple disappearance was written out of the equation. The police knew that she had been taken. Several days later, a rucksack was discovered near the Watarase riverside. She had been found, but too late. This rucksack had been made locally, and the model had been sold perhaps only a few dozen times. The person who bought this rucksack and used it in the crime was probably someone from the community, and with a little bit of legwork, the police might just nab the person behind the crime. However, the investigation turned up nothing. They found absolutely no clues. While I can't find any confirmation, it appears that the rucksack was rare enough to be seen as a tantalizing piece of evidence, but in reality they had no real solid evidence without the sales documentation, and this was before video cameras or CCTV. So it offered no real answers. Things went quiet in Ashikaga, and questions went unanswered. Things settled down into their usual routines. After all, Ashikaga was a quiet city, surrounded for the most part by rural countryside. Things were slower there, and while the shock of that first incident was bad, as the years wore on, people began to forget. But suddenly, something broke that pattern. It was November of 1984, a Saturday. A 5-year-old girl at a pachinko parlor went missing without a trace. Once again, the police and the community sprung into action, looking, searching, trying to find the lost child. It would take almost 2 years before her skeletal remains would be found a little over a mile from the pachinko parlor and her home. There were no leads, there was no evidence, nothing to go off of. It was as if a ghost had done it. It was another tragedy that the local police were incapable of solving. The killer, who was clearly operating locally, hadn't given up on his desires, and the police would need to put in effort to find this guy. The heat was on, but like I said, they found nothing. It seems that the killer felt the heat, because the next child wasn't in Ashikaga, but rather the nearby town of Ojima, now Ota City. That's the site where the killer decided to strike next. In 1987, an 8-year-old girl was last seen heading to the park by her home with their kitten. On Respect for the Aged Day, a national holiday. That little girl never made it home. Like the others, it was initially a disappearance, and like the latest attack in Ashikaga, the killer had learned to hide the victims in a much more effective manner, unfortunately. It took over a year for the skeletal remains of that little girl to be found in the floodplains of the Tone River. While the parents of the child did receive a menacing letter from another active serial killer targeting children in the Tokyo area at that time, a man named Miyazaki Tsutomu, other than that, there was no evidence pointing towards any culprit. But yes, there were multiple killers working in the same general region during this period. It made the situation and investigation actually very complicated. And what's worse is that there may have been upwards of 3 killers, or perhaps the killer from Ashikaga might have been more active than the police were able to predict. There were many similar cases not too far away from Ashikaga, or from Tokyo. To answer the question, we have to go back to 1981. Just 2 years after the first incident in Ashikaga, a 9-year-old girl had went missing when returning home from school. But this was about an hour away from Ashikaga by car in the neighboring Ibaraki Prefecture, in the small town of Makabe. Makabe was a rural area filled with long stretches of rice fields that could isolate people on the road. Backward paths leading from Makabe up into the neighboring mountains meant that this was actually a prime area to take someone, do what you would with them, and then dump their bodies up in the mountains. In 1983, yet another seemingly connected attack occurred. Just down the road from Ashikaga, in Kiryu City, the remains of a 12-year-old girl had been found. This was close to Ashikaga, but because it was before the second homicide in Ashikaga, it didn't raise any alarm bells. Nobody was really thinking that there was a serial killer. This next similar case occurred in a rather faraway area in Nikko City in Tochigi. A 3-year-old girl who was fishing with her older brother and sister suddenly disappeared. This happened in 1985, which was after the second disappearance in Ashikaga, in 1984. But the distance and the fact that the remains of that girl hadn't ever been discovered means that no connection was ever made to the ongoing situation in Ashikaga, at least at the time. Now it is commonly mentioned as being potentially connected to it, but we aren't sure. The next retroactively connected case was that of a 15-year-old girl who went missing when returning home from school in Toride City. The age and overall distance away from the rest of the crimes means that this was unlikely to be related, really. I don't think it's connected. That happened in 1987, and unfortunately, in that part of Japan, 1987 would be a very active year for killers. Do you remember the girl who was carrying the kitten? It happened on September 15th, 1987. And in 1987, just a day before that one, on September the 14th, another case had occurred. In Gunma's Takase City, a little under an hour away from Ashikaga by car, a little boy named Yoshiaki had gone missing. It was in the lead up to Respect for the Aged Day, when the 5-year-old Yoshiaki had disappeared while playing on a slide in a shrine by his home at around 2:30 p.m. In a few short minutes, the unattended Yoshiaki had simply disappeared. His parents and family looked for him, and within hours his disappearance was reported to the police, as they should have done, but they couldn't find him. That same night, his parents were bombarded with calls from an unknown man demanding money. "I'm taking care of your kid. The kid is worth about 20 million. Give me 20 million, and if you don't hand it over, the kid dies. Did you make contact with the police?" Yoshiaki's father told the man that he contacted the police and filed a request for a search. "Take back the request and wait with that 20 million. The call ended. The man called back about an hour later. "Who are you?" The younger brother. "What's the deal with the kid? What's the deal with the kid? Give me 20 million. Give me 20 million. My grandfather is bedridden. My grandmother is elderly. We don't have that kind of money. And besides, it's a bank holiday." The following day, on the 15th, was Respect for the Aged Day, a bank holiday. For some reason, the kidnapper was unaware that that day afterwards would be a bank holiday. The kidnapper made another call the following hour, this time putting Yoshiaki on the phone. "Dad?" "Yeah, it's your dad. Are you okay?" "I'm okay." "What are you doing?" "I'm going to be coming home now." "Hey, where are you?" Where are you calling from? From a home? A home where? I'm with a policeman. You with a policeman? Ah, that's good. That's good. Then, the phone suddenly cut out. That next day, the phone rang 13 times. Only enough to ring, but never slow enough for them to pick up. The day after that, on the 16th, in the morning, another phone call came through. Hello? Prepare 10 million by tonight. Hello? I can't understand you. Can you say that again? I'll call you again. Though the family prepared the huge sum, a second call never came. That following day, Yoshiaki's nude body was discovered after having been tossed from a bridge. The police's attempt to trace the call turned up that the man was calling from inside Gunma Prefecture and a suspicious white car had been spotted in that area the day that Yoshiaki was taken. The car had Gunma plates. Sadly, like the other murders, the child was dumped nude and the police were incapable of finding where the killer went. Some 6,000 people were investigated by the Gunma police, but nothing was turned up. Nothing was discovered and nothing was found. In the aftermath of yet another tragedy, the police and the public were left with nothing but questions. This means that there was perhaps a minimum of 3 separate killers targeting children in the Tokyo area operating at one time. Miyazaki Tsutomu, who operated in Tokyo targeting little girls, this kidnapper, who targeted a young boy, and the killer from Ashikaga, who targeted young girls as well. How do we know that the kidnapper wasn't the Ashikaga killer, you ask? Well, because if he was the man who took the girl with the kitten on September 15th, the following day after Yoshiaki's disappearance, it would be impossible to manage a kidnapping and then also do a murder on the side and then another murder. With all the phone calls and all of that, it'd be impossible. It just wouldn't be possible from a timeline perspective. The incidents were concurrent with each other, so that means that that killer is another person. However, there is an interesting catch in the story of Yoshiaki. The brutality of the crime attracted the Japanese news. Japan is, for the most part, a safe country. These sorts of things really aren't commonplace when compared to other countries, and the brutality of what happened to Yoshiaki, which I didn't go into and I don't intend to because it was really awful. I don't want to make this into some sort of spectacle, but it was so horrible that the press in Japan somehow managed to cross over to the Michael Jackson Bad World Tour because Michael Jackson himself had seen a news report of the incident while he was in Tokyo. Michael Jackson donated some $20,000 to the family, got a jacket with Yoshiaki's name on it, and dedicated the song Man in the Mirror to him. But like I said, nothing was turned up and there was no resolution to that case. For a time, there was quiet, and nobody was hurt, and there was nothing to worry about. But, as always, no killer rests forever. May 12th, 1990. A 4-year-old girl was playing in a pachinko parlor parking lot in Ashikaga while her father played inside. Suddenly, she disappeared. The following day, she was found laying along the floodplain of the Watarase River, just as the others had. Left behind on her clothes, they found some of the criminal's bodily fluids, and the police tested it, finding that the blood type was type B. Soon witnesses came forward, saying that they had seen a strange man walking around with a little girl around the crime scene. One of the witnesses described him as looking like the character Lupin III. Another one of the witnesses happened to be an art teacher and sketched an image of the scene of the criminal and the little girl. This was the biggest break in the Ashikaga killings since they had started. Multiple witnesses, blood type, DNA, and a description. The noose was finally closing in on the Ashikaga killer. For several months, the police used eyewitness accounts, but they couldn't find what they were looking for, so they switched things up, instead using a profile, single male who likes kids. Almost immediately, they found a man who matched the profile, a 45-year-old man named Suguya Toshikazu. Though he had no prior convictions, he resembled the description, lived in Ashikaga near where the body was discovered, and worked as a bus driver for the local nursery school. It was enough for the police to start following him, though he was fired once the police started to ask around at his job, naturally. By December of 1991, the police had grabbed a trash bag of Sugaya's and harvested a tissue with his bodily fluids on it. and it matched the DNA found at the scene. It was a match. Sugaya was arrested and charged with homicide and kidnapping with an obscene purpose. Immediately after the arrest, his father died from the shock. Soon, Sugaya had confessed. He tried to claim later on that he was innocent, but he was caught dead to rights. The witnesses, the confession, the DNA, it was all airtight. By 1993, Sugaya had been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for his crimes against children. After all, DNA does not lie. So, how is it that they weren't able to arrest him? Clearly, they just had arrested, convicted, and sentenced the Ashikaga killer. Well, this event happened in 1990, but the kidnapping I showed you at the beginning that was caught on camera happened in 1996. They caught the wrong guy. You see, DNA testing was still experimental and it wasn't accurate enough. Sugaya had a similar enough DNA profile to the real killer that he actually managed to get a false positive. This is probably one of the only times in history where DNA just got the wrong guy. Well, how do we know that DNA got the wrong guy? Well, the confession that they helped use to convict him was wrong. In fact, it was forced. He described in the confession putting the little girl in the basket of his bike. Not only does this not make any sense from a size perspective, but the witnesses described the criminal as walking across the floodplain. No mention of a bike. And as far as the DNA goes, in 2009 a second DNA test was finally allowed by a panel of judges, and it was found that Sugaya's DNA didn't match the DNA at the crime scene. It really didn't. The DNA was wrong. So, the real killer is still on the loose. For a time, the killer held back. He didn't make any moves. Perhaps he was afraid of the heat. But then one day he decided to step into a pachinko parlor once again.
景品交換コーナーの前で遊ぶゆかりちゃん。その時、手前からサングラスにキャップ型の帽子をかぶった男が現れる。店内を歩き回っていた男は、ゆかりちゃんを目に留めると、接触する機会を伺うような動きを見せる。店内の長椅子でゆかりちゃんの隣に座った男。ゆかりちゃんの気を引くように何やら話しかけている。この時、男は外に行こうと誘うように3度店の外を指さしている。この後、男は店を出るが、同時にゆかりちゃんも姿を消してしまう。
That little girl was never seen again. Yet again, paranoia and fright resulted, and the police weren't much help. In the aftermath of this latest crime, parents started to leave their children in their cars while they played at the pachinko parlor, resulting in a rash of heat stroke deaths. While you may have expected that this would turn the legal ties in Sugaya's favor, the answer is no. He remained behind bars for 13 more years, begging for a DNA test, and like I said, when a panel of judges finally allowed it, it was discovered that yes, the original test results were inaccurate. Now the police could go back to the case of the Ashikaga killer. No. While Sugaya was behind bars, the statute of limitations on all of the murders except for the 1996 kidnapping all ran out. And yes, you did hear me right, the statute of limitations for murder. This is why, no matter what happens, the man in the footage cannot be arrested. Japan and other countries like South Korea used to have a statute of limitation for murder, which is fairly shocking, I feel. There have been cases where police misconduct or just failing to get the guy have led to the killers getting away. Typically, this happens in cold cases or if the police just falsely accuse the wrong guy. Other times, things look like the Ikusaka Dam incident. The body of a man who had been tied up was dredged up on the Sai River. The police came forward and claimed that this was a clear case of the man having taken his own life. Naturally, the parents of the man did not believe this. but the cops wrapped up the case just as fast as they had opened it up. They were not interested in investigating. In the year 2000, a man came forward admitting that while under the influence of narcotics, he and a friend had attacked the man, tied him up, and then tossed the man off the dam while he was still alive. By the time the murder charges were ready to be filed, in 2003, the statute of limitations had passed. There are a surprisingly large number of times in Japan where cold cases went forever unsolved, and the killers weren't able to be successfully charged with anything. At last, in early 2010, under the government of Democratic Party of Japan Prime Minister Hatoyama Yukio, the statute of limitations for murder were abolished, and several other crimes that result in death, like manslaughter, had their statute of limitations doubled. But regardless, all of the crimes that the killer from Ashikaga were involved in, with the exception of the kidnapping that was caught on camera in 1996, had already met the statute of limitations by the time the law had been changed. It was too late, and in 2021, the last case, the one from 1996, reached the statute of limitations. He will never be caught, and he will never face consequences for his horrible actions. Yoshiaki and many of the other children covered in this video would now be in their 30s or 40s by now if they weren't attacked. They would probably have families and kids of their own. Entire lives, families, and futures were destroyed from the actions of a sick, evil man. Or perhaps as few as 2 others also in the area. More than anything else, just make sure to keep an eye out. I'm not saying to be paranoid, of course. There's clearly a fine line to walk between helicopter parenting and letting your kid wander unsupervised. But clearly this story and recent events underline how important it is to stay vigilant. This world is a big, beautiful place, filled with many, many kind-hearted people who would defend a child and would give you the shirt off their back. But there are also some evil people just waiting in the shadows, looking for a chance to attack. So, stay safe, and thanks for watching. As always, the Charlie Dogwood channel provides stories on crime, corruption, chaos, conspiracies, and of course, cool stories. If that sounds good to you, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing the video. Also, feel free to check out my Twitch, YouTube gaming channel, and stream VOD channel. All links are in the description. So, without further ado, please check out this video. It's pretty good. Good stories only. Thank you.